Eastern European forests and marshes, who, well out of proportion to the size of the Jewish population, blew up numerous railway installations and Nazi police and army posts, even while avoiding the German units sent out to wipe them out, and the occasional bullets from anti-Semitic members of Polish or other Russian non-Jewish partisan groups, and frequent betrayal by local peasants. At its start, between 1942 and 1943, some estimate that Jews made up as many as 1/2 of all partisans in the Polish forests. There were an estimated 30,000 Jews in the Soviet partisan movement once it was organized. And this candle is also for those amazing family camps I told you about, hidden away in the swamps and in the forests. This candle is also for the Soviet Army's official Lithuanian division, which was so overwhelmingly Jewish that orders often had to be given in Yiddish. I heard, yes, in Yiddish. Can you imagine? And it's also for the 32 Palestinian parachutists, like the young Hannah Senesh, whom the British only grudgingly agreed to drop back into Eastern Europe out of a total of 240 eager volunteers. And they had to sign a form saying, we vow that we are going to help general resistance. We will not be focusing on Jews. And I don't want to give short shrift to the British Army's Palestinian Jewish Brigade, which was the only brigade of Jews anywhere that was able to fight under its own flag. Now, you may be wondering why my candles are green. It's not for coincidence. When I was working at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, I met a modest and wonderful little Jewish lady, Chaya Palevsky. Oh gosh, she was so wonderful and so humble. She was in the Vilna ghetto as a girl, forced to sort through clothing that was being brought in. Now, when her little sister was deported for so-called resettlement at a place called Ponar, Chaya gave her a pretty white blouse on which she'd embroidered colorful little flowers, daisies and things. Not long after, she found that same blouse in a pile of clothing that had been brought into Vilna for sorting. And now she knew what Ponar was, and that her sister had not been resettled, but murdered. That very night, Chaya put on that blouse herself and escaped Vilna to join the partisans in the forest. And when that blouse got torn, she mended it with parachute silk. And when it became dirty, she scrubbed it in the white ashes of the campfires. Chaya donated that blouse to the Museum of Jewish Heritage. No matter how hard it was to survive in the forest, she told me, at least we were free of that stinking ghetto. She told me ever since then, I've been a nature girl. She became a great nature lover. So my green candles are for her, and for all of those who sought shelters in the forests and used it as a base for resistance. Now we're almost finished. This is our seventh and penultimate candle. From the Jews of the deportation camps and the 6 death camps, weakened, deceived, with children or the elderly in their arms, some might find it presumptuous to expect resistance. After all, non-Jewish concentration camp inmates, including 3 million trained soldiers in of the Soviet Union in German POW camps, they behaved no differently and launched no significant acts of resistance. And yet in the death camps, in these darkest chambers of Nazi devising, not once, but the impossible happened 3 times out of 6 death camps. In Sobibor, timed to Sukkot, and led by the Jewish Soviet officer Alexander Pehorsky, where at least 10 Nazi officers were killed with hatchets before inmates broke out to join the partisans. And in Treblinka, where the fuel tanks were blown sky high and a mass escape ensued. And even in Auschwitz-Birkenau on October 7, 1944, against the wishes of the mixed international camp underground, where guards were attacked and a crematorium, number 4, set afire. Who did it? It was those same crematorium workers whom I told you about before, the ones who had buried those manuscripts in bottles in the ash. And by the way, Another way to resist was to to somehow get a louse, which was infected with typhus, and if you could, get it on the collar of an SS guard. So for those who fought in the death camps against all odds, light Hanukkah candle number 7. Now, I should mention at this point some more spiritual resistance, because I mustn't give that short shrift. There's more opportunity to resist spiritually than otherwise, and spiritual resistance was dangerous. But just some examples, it took many forms. For example, secret lending libraries in the ghettos that were not allowed. Children performing in secret holiday festivals for the community, and naturally having to keep their voices very low. Or in Auschwitz-Birkenau, men who set up a cardboard box and guarded it while other men used it as a sukkah. Or the women in the death camps in Auschwitz-Birkenau, who were so desperate and hungry to eat, but every Friday saved a rotten potato, and that's what they got, rotten potatoes, and scooped out 2 little holes, and saved some rancid margarine that they so wanted to eat, but put it in the holes, and then tore threads from their prison garments to make wicks and lit Shabbos candles. Isn't that just as important? Maybe more so than armed resistance? Now, as much as those Jews who fought wanted to live, those who opted for resistance had no false hopes of salvation. The only encouragement they could offer one another was an ethic of action in the face of near certain death. Not a way of putting out the flames, but a method of walking through them. But there were more than one way of walking through those flames. Marek Edelman, himself a surviving Warsaw Ghetto freedom fighter until his death in 2009, and I met him, and it was a great moment for me. I went down on one knee to him. He explained the courage of those who went the more common route. Those people went quietly and with dignity, he said. It is a horrendous thing when one is going so quietly to one's death. It is infinitely more difficult than to go out shooting. Many of these Jews did not assume that posture of dignity when they could manage it, for reasons as paltry as personal honor. Facing the inevitable, they appropriated the moment of their death to the sanctity of their own Jewish values, and went with the Marseillaise, Hatikva, or the Shema on their lips, in the spirit of Kiddush Hashem, in the name of God. And for them, let us all, Jew and non-Jew, light the 8th and last candle. I would end there, but I have to come back to the present. For decades, and to this very day, we've seen the repeat horror and ugliness of false martyrs and fanatics who've maimed and killed thousands of innocents over the years in full expectation of glory and heavenly rewards. We've seen their self-glorifying photos and videos either left behind or while perpetrating their supposedly valiant deeds. Even when it is not reported, make no mistake, all of them are ultimately ideologically inspired by an underlying belief in a world Jewish conspiracy and their hatred of Jews, not just Israel. This goes from Hamas to Hezbollah, from Iran's Islamic leaders to the unspeakable depravity of ISIS. And here at home, the young hate-filled men who gladly perpetrated the massacre at the Boston Marathon. I want to conclude by telling you something Ismail Haniyeh said in the Washington Post in an interview just after the Passover Eve massacre in Netanya on March 27, 2002, that killed 30 persons sitting down to a Seder and maimed 140. He said that Palestinians have Israelis on the run because they found their weak spot. Jews, he said with contempt, love life more than any other people, and they prefer not to die. And so Palestinian suicide bombers, he said, are the ideal weapon for fighting people like Jews, for whom all human life, I'm saying, is sacred. Well, today Haniyeh is the president of Gaza. And he is right. As right as Adolf Hitler, who famously said that conscience is a Jewish invention. Hitler was referring to Judaism's gift to the world, the moral basis of Western civilization, the Ten Commandments. Now, the Jews who defied the Nazis, whether spiritually, through armed resistance, or by simply surviving, did so under conditions of unimaginable extremity, unknown to today's terrorists, and never by taking innocent lives. Nothing could make clearer the difference between fanaticism and true courage. Despite the near certainty of death, the anthem of the Jewish partisans, which you may know, started with these famous lines. Sag nicht keinmal, als du gehst den letzten Weg. Never say you are on your last road. The fight against today's terrorists may be a long one, but as our song and the story of the Jewish resistance fighters makes clear, that journey, that fight, will be the last one for the terrorists, and not for all of us of good will. Thank you.